Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here today in conversation with my former professor, Professor Derek Muller, who now holds the Ben V. Willie Professorship in Excellence at the University of Iowa College of Law and is a nationally recognized scholar in the field of election law. Derek, thank you for joining us. And on a personal note, just want to thank you for your instruction and all you did to kind of spur my career in government. So I appreciate you greatly for that. I will jump right into our questions given our limited time frame, but I would love to hear from you about what is your greatest dream for the United States, and also what is your greatest fear for our country? And as it relates to the fear, what present circumstances are contributing to that?
Sure. I mean, lots of dreams and fears, I guess we could have, but I think about, in the area of elections, right? The hopes and the fear really relate to one another. I worry about the lack of confidence or lack of trust in the election process. People who doubt that their voice matters, people who doubt that the rules are fair, people who doubt that they're going to be able to participate in the process. And my hope is that we, have experienced resiliency in the past in the United States. We've experienced great trials when it comes to election and voting rights, with opportunities to elect the preferred candidates of our choice, to have those candidates peacefully transition in terms of the power that they have. And so we just came out of an election where, there were a lot of fears that were raised about what the process might look like, some hiccups, some places where there has been litigation and lawsuits and worries. But again, for the most part, we're seeing the process play out as it should. Voters had a voice, they had their say, the votes are counted, some very close, some wider margins, and we're going to see a new set of elected officials throughout the United States, some of whom have been on this call today, who will be serving in government. So I continue to hope that we will see increased trust and confidence in elections, that as we continue to develop more transparency, more opportunities for people to participate in the process, for more transparent outcomes, for speedier counting of votes and speedier resolution of things, and courts that are willing to step in the appropriate point to ensure that the right results are transmitted and finalized in our elections. I have great hope that we will see that process play out much better in the future than it has in recent years in the past.
So it's very interesting to me to hear you say that, like, for the most part, as far as it relates to the voting process, things are working as they should be in the US, because I would say politicians on both sides of the aisle are, in their own way, kind of like disputing that, right? You have people on one side calling out about fears as it relates to voter suppression, and then on the other side you have people talking about voter fraud. And so my question for you is, what is the danger, if any, of politicians using this kind of rhetoric to encourage people to go out and vote? And if those aren't the fears that we should have, what are the electoral concerns that we should be paying attention to in our processes?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, there is a gap, I think, between what people campaign on and the reality, right? There's a lot of what you might describe as fundraising out there, getting people outraged about the process, about the system, and trying to raise money to litigate off it. But when you look at it, voter turnout is relatively high. It's still low compared to other parts of the world, but relatively high in recent elections and very high over the last 100 years, all things considered. We have more opportunities to vote than we've ever had before in the past, with many states increasing absentee voting, early in-person voting, online voter registration, some things that never existed 20 years ago in the way some of these processes play out. And when it comes to things like voter integrity, fraud concerns, we have robust efforts to try to check those things, and very few criminal prosecutions, even in light of more and more illumination. We're experiencing a part of intense political polarization where there are people who are deeply skeptical of the motives of the other side, which is a very unfortunate place to be. There's always partisanship, but we need to have that confidence in the political process. And I think you see, again, and it's happened problematic in a few places in the United States. So I don't want to minimize those things, But for the most part, you can see that when the results come in, election officials on both sides of the aisle are participating in good faith and certifying results, and they're transitioning power. Again, we haven't always experienced that, and we can think about events in the last couple of years where that didn't happen. But for the most part, the underlying reality sort of belies some of the concerns that are made out there, that most of the time, in most races, in most places, voters are able to vote, they're able to cast their vote, it's able to be counted, and we should have much more confidence in that process and praise those millions and millions of votes that are counted without any sort of consternation or fear or worry or intimidation, and sort of highlight those things as real successes in the system, because I think it really highlights the strength and breadth of the support for voting rights that we have in the United States.
Okay, so multiple questions coming to mind, like with you saying that. First, I think it's really interesting, as you're saying, like particularly with our legislative branch, or our executive branches, people are kind of lacking confidence in what our politicians are doing. And I think a lot of people view the court system as one way to kind of balance and rectify those rights and wrongs. But as it relates to voter rights in particular, I feel like a lot of people lost faith after the decision in Shelby County v. Holder, that some people feel really gutted the Voting Rights Act. Do you feel like courts are getting it right?
So that's a huge question, Brittany. That's thinking about what the courts are doing. I mean, one is to think about what courts are doing in terms of a lot of litigants bringing challenges. And I think especially during the 2020 election, there were huge challenges and pressures in our system to think about COVID, to think about voting opportunities for people who couldn't physically sign ballots, for those who were fearful, for those who couldn't travel. And courts and legislatures and executives, there was actually like a lot of working together, and some when the courts are involved, maybe not so much working together, to provide solutions to the process. Some of them were temporary, some of them are going to be a little bit more long-term. So there are things, I think, in the process where people have a lot more confidence in the results. For things like, the court's decision in Shelby County versus Holder, a 2013 decision involving the Voting Rights Act, or a number of other cases over the years where people have challenged it, there have been responses. They haven't really come in Congress, and so we can talk about that. It's an interesting question to think about what Congress can be doing, but it's also happening in a lot of the states, right? A lot of states are passing, more states are passing laws that empower voters, that try to outlaw partisan gerrymandering, that do the kinds of things that I think increase the kind of resiliency in our election systems that we want. So when courts do something that we disapprove of, my encouragement is always to say, we'll turn to the executive branch and turn to the legislative branch and see what other solutions are available. And again, despite all those pressures in 2013 to think about what it looks like in the South, I would venture to say that, it was Republicans who tended to support Shelby County and Democrats who tended to oppose it. And we can think about what that looks like in the South. But I would say we've seen a lot of resiliency in a lot of our election systems, and maybe some election outcomes in different parts of the country that we didn't expect 10 years ago. I think, again, this is to the sense that the American people vote and behave in different ways that maybe are not easily anticipated by whatever rules we put in the process, that the voters are really in control, not the system, not the government, not the rules that are put in place, but it really is the voters that have their voice that will be heard.
So one thing I love about you is that, you're an academic, obviously you're a scholar, you're a legal professor, and you speak about these things in classes and in articles, but you have also actually kind of been on the front lines because you worked the electoral polls. Like you worked at polling places, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I've worked several times.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know, because I would venture to say that most of us here probably haven't done that. What was a surprising observation you have? And like from that experience, did you see any significant obstacles to civic engagement based off of that?
I think people, when they show up to vote, and I hope when you all vote, you feel this way, you are patient and understanding of the workers who are there. They're trying to do their job and try to get you through the system as best they can. Here in Iowa, we have same-day voter registration, which provides new opportunities for voters to show up on election day and be able to register to vote. But that can be a more time-consuming process, proving your identity, proving your residence, making sure that we have all the paperwork in place. And for some voters, they're confused. They're from another part of the state. They moved here from another state. They want to be able to vote on election day. So it's providing almost this sort of customer service support on election day. And we're not paid very well. we are only there for one day. We receive some training to try to see what it looks like. So yeah, I write a lot. I participate in amicus briefs in front of courts. I think about the legal structures, but then there's this different, very human side about these laws that we have in place and what they do to the typical voter who confronts them, making sure that they can come in, get their ballot, vote effectively, cast it, and have the confidence that at the end of the night, when we close up the station and I'm counting all 650 ballots, that we've reached the right result on a bipartisan team basis to make sure before we send those results out to the state.
Thank you. So I'm just going to ask one last question before passing it on. But given your experience, all that you've seen, like, what would be your ideal version of democracy in the U.S.?
It's amazing. It's a great question. I mean, it would be a system where I think the confidence is high in the American people, that the people have this confidence in the outcome of the election. And whether or not that looks more like more early in-person voting, more absentee voting, whether it looks like more voting on election day, a lot of candidates on the ballot, or trying to get to two candidates with one with a majority, there are all kinds of mechanisms that political scientists and attorneys and people fight about. But really that we come up with the system that everyone agrees is going to give us the best result, even though we don't know up front who's going to win, right? That it gives those confident results at the end of the day, and that we know that whatever we've done, we've played the game, we have a result, and we will abide and respect that result until the next election. Whatever set of rules we can coalesce around, maybe that involves some bargaining among parties and among different groups, but hopefully we can achieve that kind of confidence in the system in each state throughout the United States and on a nationwide basis.
I love that. Well, we appreciate you being with us today, Derek, and I will now send it back to Nikki, our moderator and managing director.